Hello there, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for an episode of the Cosmopolite Collective. I am your host, Diana Lauritson, and I'm here with a very special guest, my friend and colleague, Hashim Hathaway, who is a writer and a podcaster, and the creator and founder of the Never Daunted Radio Network. So he is here to join me today for a fun conversation, I'm hoping, on plus size dating, romance, relationships, intimacy, all that good stuff. So, hello, Hashim, and thank you for joining us.
Well, hi, Diane. I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. We actually had this conversation before, or we've had different iterations of this conversation. So we're hoping to kind of pull out some of the highlights for all of you. But I would say, this topic is not only a fun topic, but it's also a topic that we've gotten some requests on, particularly after we did a podcast last summer on plus size travel. That was a very popular podcast for us. And of course, we are continuing the discussion of the plus size experience by talking about plus size romance and dating and, of course, intimacy. So, to start out the conversation, I want to talk about you, Hashim, and why you're interested in this particular topic.
Well, for most or all of my life, I've been plus size. Now, I've experienced some significant weight loss, which was a good thing, but I think that in my transition to something that society considered more normal, I wanted to take some of the lessons that I learned, some of the good ones and the bad ones, and sort of help others who are going through the same thing. I think so much of the dating experience and fear of dating, especially when you are a larger person, comes from preconceived notions, what you think society thinks of you, and some of our own insecurities. So I think it's important to have some of these conversations, largely because it's about dispelling a number of myths. I mean, whether you're larger or smaller, you can have the kind of life and the lifestyle that you want to have, but at the same time, you have to get over some of the things that have been holding you down.
I agree. And you talked about dispelling myths, which is something I think we'll get to in a little bit because there are some different myths that I would like to shed some light on during this conversation. But I want to talk about confidence and body positivity. You mentioned as a plus size individual that you lost weight, you had a significant body transformation, and you
Yes,
used the phrase of, what society calls more normal.
right.
Can
It's
you talk a little bit about what your experience, what your confidence levels were like
well,
before we'll call it a body
yeah.
transformation,
Before
but
before the weight loss, before the body transformation, it's 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 interesting. So, in some aspects, there's a lot of blinders. So when I was at my largest, one thing that I noticed is that when my confidence was the lowest, I mean, at its bargain basement, rock bottom, was being unable to even look like me I was unable to look in a mirror. I could not look at myself in a mirror unless it was like up close. If I was from a distance, I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to see the imperfections that I'd gotten used to and the way that clothes sat on me. And so it really forced me to keep a blinders up sort of view of things. And then in the way in which you take pictures, because the thing is, for me, a through line is that, for better or for worse, relatively attractive male. So I got a lot of compliments even when I was bigger, but at the same time, the compliments didn't feel as natural to me because I didn't see it and I didn't feel it.
Mhm.
And that's really where confidence lives. It lives where you feel. And if you feel like you're not good enough, nothing anyone can say to you will change that. But if you feel like, I think for me, part of the body transformation also took place in the mind. because
Mm-hmm.
as that was happening, it's actually harder for you to see it up front, right? But then
Mm-hmm.
when I would speak to people who I hadn't seen in some time, or people who had been looking at me over time, they say, "Hey man, you look great." And to me, initially, I couldn't see it. And I'm like, really? Is that what you see? And then it turned into, oh, people are noticing the work that I'm putting in, and now I can feel it. Now it's a
Mm-hmm.
realization for me, and the body positivity meter started to trend in the green. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that having these conversations, though, highlight the fact that so much of what we have in terms of acceptance physically, which relates into how we date others and how we see others and the conceptions that are born in and around that. Once the body positivity happens, once that change happens and your attitude changes, everything you see changes. It becomes brighter. It becomes more optimistic. And even if you're not exactly where you want to be, and I don't consider myself completely at where I want to be, I can't deny the way in which some things have changed in the way that I look at myself. And so, one of the first uh, signs, I guess you could say, was the fact that I could finally go to the pool and take my shirt off. And even though things
Mm-hmm.
aren't perfect underneath there, I have that confidence. And so the confidence makes everything look better. Not only
Mm-hmm.
internally, but externally. The way that I carry myself, standing up straight and not worrying that, yeah, I still got a little man boob left. But it's because I've lost so much and I know how bad it's been. To me,
Mm-hmm.
it's a complete change, and therefore I am far more confident. But hey, the thing that you feared, the thing that I feared when I was younger and more self conscious, much more self conscious, is that if I had my shirt off, somebody would make fun of me because that's what men did to each other. And then you think, well, would a woman look
Mm-hmm.
at me and find me desirable? And and I think age also, we can sidecar this with the fact that when you get older, you get much more used to yourself, and when you're more comfortable in your skin, it resonates everywhere. So there's the one aspect of body positivity that comes from weight loss, and there's
Mm-hmm.
the other aspect that comes from just maturity. And when you feel that, you're willing to do that. And so now, when summertime comes, the shirt comes off and I'm fine with it. And I know who looks at me and says he might be cute, and I know who looks at me and they crack a joke in their mind. And it's okay either way, because as long as I'm good with me, that's what's going to radiate out to others, especially those who I would want to attract.
I consider myself plus size, and I can relate to some of your experience where you were plus size and lost weight. I was not plus size and gained weight and became plus size. And so it's kind of looking at it from a different perspective where it took away a lot of my confidence because things that were easier for me to do before, just easier for me to maneuver in day to day life, like when I'm traveling, when I'm sitting on a plane, just different things, crossing my legs, like different things like that became more difficult when I gained weight. And that took a huge toll on my confidence. And I think that traveling really has brought out it has taught me a lot about where my confidence lies when it comes to being plus size, because now I will go on a trip and I will wear a bikini or wear whatever. I feel fine about it. But a couple years ago, no, I would never have felt that way because all I would be thinking about is how much more imperfect I looked
Sure.
than I looked before. But I feel like we're never where we want to be. It's always like, oh, well, there's more to lose. There's more to lose. And I look back at old pictures and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have appreciated myself back in this picture, because in this picture, I felt fat and I
Mm.
did not feel attractive. And I'll look back through travel pictures and I noticed, we talked about this on the podcast that we did on plus size travel. You look back on pictures and things and you don't want to take pictures
Right.
because you're traveling. So instead, the pictures would change to like more scenic things, more, outside, different activities that did not focus on me being in the picture outside of like a selfie. And just how you mentioned, just wanting to look at your face in the mirror. And I think that's where, for so many years, it was like my pictures, I started to get to the point where I only wanted my face in the pictures. Part of that, I think, came also because people would say things to me like, "You're so pretty. You would be so much prettier if you could just lose weight." And I would hear
Oh,
comments like that
yes.
all the time, where they were like, "Oh, you would look great, or you would totally be my type if you just lost weight, or your face is good enough but the rest of your body isn't." And I think I internalized a lot of that, and it definitely impacted my confidence in terms of approaching men, or just even wanting to go out. Like, I got to the point where I didn't even want to go out and get dressed up, because I just felt like no matter what I put on, I never liked what I saw in the mirror.
Right.
And clearly, if you're inside all the time, unless you're planning on dating your mailman, you're not going to really get a lot of hits with in the dating scene.
Right. So let me ask you this. What changed for you? What was the thing that led you towards acceptance? What was it like? Here, let me give you an example to bring up if you can. You mentioned that, when you travel now, you wear bikinis again and you don't have those same type of feelings. Tell us what it's like to look in the mirror at the bikini, and at what point did you realize you were okay?
I don't know if it was like a conscious like thing that happened and like a flip switched and all of a sudden I felt confident. I think I still deal with self-confidence issues, but it was it's really just been in the past couple of years. One thing that helped me was therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't even the reason that I was going to therapy, really, not necessarily confidence. It's just, when you go to therapy, you talk about a lot of different things. And I remember my therapist kind of saying, why, why aren't you going out? If you want to date, or if you feel lonely, or you want to find a companion, why aren't you dating? Why are you just sitting at home? And I just said, well, I don't like how I look. And I feel like if I go out, I would either be facing rejection because the guys I'm attracted to are not going to be attracted to me,
Right.
or just in general, just feeling like nothing that I put on, like no matter what, I was not going to feel confident, and it would just ruin my night because my attitude would be so bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to learn, a lot of it had to do with attitude. And my therapist made a comment to me, and she said, "Diana, if you had a friend that was overweight, would you tell her, sit in your house, don't go anywhere until you lose weight because no one's going to want you?" And I'm like, no, that's so mean.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, why are you so mean to yourself? She's like, why would you say things to yourself that you wouldn't even say to a friend? Like, you are important. You are a person. You shouldn't talk to yourself in a way that you wouldn't talk to your friends.
And this is related to the idea of acceptance. So much of the criticism that plus size people get comes from themselves, because they have been hardwired to believe that they are the least desirable, and that if they are the least desirable, they are not going to match up with the people that they desire. The idea that somebody is out of your league. That's something that plagued me for many, many years. And not knowing that, I spoke to a woman once that I was really, really interested in. Like, this was in high school. But even though, like, in high school, I wasn't that big. I was bigger, but I wasn't that big. Played football, in relatively decent shape, but just a little puffier. And the thing is, I had a girl tell me, well, I was a grown woman at that point, that you didn't talk to anybody. If you'd have actually just tried to talk to me, chances are we could have gone on a date. You kind of sold yourself short. And that's the yoke that a lot of plus size men carry. And for women, it's the idea that there's a perception that because you're bigger, that somehow you might be more promiscuous and not deserving of a standard relationship, or a sexual relationship without a measure of guilt attached to it. These are the things that we assign to ourselves, because the actual reality is that not everybody really wants to date the magazine model. Nobody wants to date the Instagram influencer that looks like this or that. We date the people that are tangible to us, the people that are real to us. And I know this is going to come off as a little rough for some people, but the idea is sometimes we need to lean into preferences. And if sometimes people prefer us for a specific thing, sometimes you lean into it just because we need to feel valued one way or the other. And how you derive that value is going to really determine how real it feels to you. If you think that everybody is just like saying that you're cute out of pity, then that's all it'll ever be. But there are some people that are actually into plus size people, and I think that that's the other end of this argument. It's not that just because I'm plus sized and you're plus sized, that as people we're only within each other's dating pool. No, our dating pools are much larger and can be because people value different things in different people. And even though we've been conditioned to believe for so long that our outer image was directly responsible for the way in which we get along in life, that's not entirely the point. And so, as plus size people, we can often psych ourselves out of the dating game or make it worse for ourselves when we can really do a lot better. When we talked about this before, I kind of likened it to the idea of a superhero character named Daredevil, where he was a blind person, but his power came from utilizing all his other senses. Well, as plus size people, we can say if our body image is the thing that's holding us back, how can we raise that by doing other things? A lot of it is basic shit like hygiene, and the other part of it is how you dress yourself, how you wear clothes and carry yourself. What is your attitude? All of these things can go up and bring the thing that you think is the lowest up with it. So that's where the confidence lies. Confidence is sexy. Woman wants to know that a man that she's with is secure within himself, because just like men want peace, women want peace too. I mean, people have different personal preferences, but on the whole, it's the idea that if you're a confident person and you hold yourself and carry yourself enough to win the person that you want to be with, then that's the type of person that wants to be with you. And it's not hard, or it's not as hard as we make it sometimes. We just have to buy into the idea that yes, we are people, and even if we don't measure up to what society has been told what its standard is, which, funny thing about that, the idea of body image as a standard. We all know, we can look at paintings from the classical periods, the oil paintings of big, buxom women and who would today be considered obese. But back then, a larger person was a sign of a healthy person, a wealthy person. And today, the opposite is true, because clothing companies wanted to produce and make money off of clothing for smaller people. Why? Because less textile equals less overhead. So yeah, we want to identify with the trim and the fit because it's easier to sell clothes for those types of people. There's always a reason, Diana. There's always an excuse and a reason, but the problem is that this has been so beat into our culture that we believe this is the only way. Unless a man has washboard abs, he's unfit for dating. And then we've turned it around to a kitschy, if a woman is actually willing to be with somebody who's a little bit larger, then it's, the zaddy or the dad bod. We have to assign something to it. No, couldn't you just be attracted to a person because of what they do present as opposed to what you think they should present?
That's so difficult because I've often thought, I want people to see the person beyond the body.
Right.
But then on the same hand, you want somebody to kind of see all of you. And I had a relative very, very close to me. She was very overweight and was one of the most amazing people ever. And I remember she had met a man online and talked to him for probably 2 years online until he got to the point where he was like, okay, we need to meet. And she was so embarrassed, she just would never meet him in person. And he was just like, at that point, was like, I love you. Why, but she did not want him. They talked on the phone all the time, but didn't want him to know what she looked like and was so afraid that he would be turned off by the fact that she was plus size, that she never went to meet him. And eventually he moved on and found someone else, and they were so compatible. And I remember it just made my heart so sad. And I kept thinking, like, I I don't know that she ever gave him the opportunity to even see if she would have been a person, if he would have accepted her for who she was, not even looked past it, but somebody who could love her for who she is after speaking to her for so long, for a couple years. But there was never that opportunity. And I think a lot of times we don't give, everything moves so quickly now, right? Everything in
Yes.
society
We
moves
are in a
fast.
swipe
We have,
left society.
yes, everything is like right there at the tip of your finger. And we don't take the time to try to really get to know people. If they don't catch your attention in 5 seconds, you're not going to know the person beyond the body, because dating apps and everything else are not designed for you really to get to know the person beyond that body. And
And how
the,
could it? How could it?
yeah, yeah. I mean, because we're looking through, all of the pictures are filtered. We're looking through, we're still trying to meet the Instagram standards in the dating apps, and that's not who we are. I can't tell you how many times, too, like where I've recently kind of started dating again. And I think men lie about a lot of things, too, on their dating profiles.
Oh, of
Like
course.
women, a lot of times, women, I would say, lie about the fact that, like, they lie about being overweight, like with the photos that they pick, or the filters, or not showing full body pictures.
Right.
Men lie about things like how many kids they have, how tall they are, whether or not they're actually bald, right? You see, or they have pictures from like 15 years ago that they put on there. So men lie as well, or men are not fully honest on dating apps.
I've never understood, as a man, I've never understood why men choose to lie about their height up front. It's the first thing that's going to get blown up. It is literally the first thing, but it is also endemic of the need for acceptance. Especially when it comes to dating profiles. I mean, even as a plus size man, yeah, I felt, most of the photos of me on when I was using dating apps looked like what you see here. You didn't see what was below. And it took a long time for me to get to the point where I could put a full-length picture of myself up and say,
Me too.
This is just who I am. This is what I am. And I've learned that some people are going to want it and some people aren't. And some people who didn't think they want it will experience it and think, oh, I should have been with that the entire time. And the reverse is also true. I think it's just how we see each other. And I know that I approach this from the perspective of a man who I accepted a lot of things about me early on. When I started losing my hair, I leaned into it. I was never going to be that person that just tried to figure it out and do the Beijing and all that shit. Because to me, it's like, look, if I'm attractive, I'm attractive. And it means without hair, I know there's always going to be somebody who wants to rub on his bald head. And those are the people, that you gravitate towards. Know your audience. This is where confidence also plays a big role. If you know your audience and spend time with people who appreciate what's there, you're never going to have a bad time. But if you continue to try to shove yourself into situations and into people that honestly that's not what they want, it's okay. I've learned, and this is the most important point, is that I'm attracted to a variety of women. I am attracted to plus-size women just like I'm attracted to thinner women. It's no longer the zero-sum game. I can only have these types of women. Because I can tell you, Diana, there's a number of thinner women that I have looked at that I would not be interested in. And there are larger women who, yes, I would. Because it does come down to the confidence, because I can see how they carry themselves. Now, there's going to be things that I like and I don't like, and everybody has that. If you're fat, if you're thin, if you're in the middle, there's always going to be that certain something that like brings something out, and it's like, oh, I can't stop looking at you. And you could be thin or you could be larger, but if there's that thing, we all have that thing. But that thing doesn't necessarily live in one space, and it doesn't live in one size. And we are not as segregated a society on these things as we'd like to believe. I think that there's been a stigma attached to dating larger people. And here's the other side of it. We've talked about our end of it. Let's talk about their end for a second. there is a stigma, or there has been a stigma attached to dating larger people. Like, oh, you couldn't do any better? Well, what does better look like? In the larger scheme of things, whether it is within a relationship or even sexually, what does better look like? Because what we're finding out is that what people have been told is better isn't always, especially within communities of color. So now the tide has turned. Before, the so-called ideal that was really sold to people were, skinny dudes with big dicks. And now we're hearing those are the broke people. And so there's always a, and these are the myths that are always perpetuated through our popular culture. We were groomed to believe that as men, every woman wanted a big dick in her life because that's what the men said in the rap songs. And so how did we not know any different? And so then we approach dating like that. And like, for example, women are told something and they're led to believe it because the pop culture that they gravitate towards says that's the thing that you want. Then you get it and you realize, it may not be for me. And that goes with everything. It's...
Well, I think I will say, just to go back to something that you said earlier, and it's about, on the dating sites and about what people see. I think that I have less anxiety in the plus size dating world when I'm honest. And I say that because honest with myself and honest about what I look like. When I would be plus size dating on an app or something like that, I just showing selfies or pictures of my face, that caused anxiety because then when you meet someone,
it's like, what are they going to say when the rest of you...
They're going to see, just like you said, they'll know how tall you are when you see them or whatever. For me, when I started putting full body pictures on, when I had gained weight and putting full body pictures on, I felt so much more comfortable because I'm like, this person knows what I look like and they're okay with it. And at the end of the day, people like what they like.
Oh, for sure.
Right? We can't get on people. People are always going to have a preference. Whether I was thin or whether I'm thick or whether I'm plus size or whether I'm fat. People have a preference on what they want to date. I have preferences on what I want to date. So if I have preferences, why am I getting on people for having preferences if those preferences do not include me? And that's okay, right? That's okay.
And that's the point. That's the point. It is okay. If you can understand that it is okay that, some people are not going to pick you. Some people absolutely are. We don't we don't need to have the biggest possible pool. I don't need everybody to think that I'm cute. I don't need everybody to want to fuck me. Because as long as I have the basket of the ones who do, I'm going to work from that basket. Now, is everything in that basket going to be desirable for me? No, but the point is to get, when we were younger, it was about quantity over quality. But as we get older and we start to figure out what our specific goals are, even if that goal is something that's a little bit more open and you don't want to settle on any one person, but you do, everybody has the right to have a preferred pool and whittle it down to, maybe there's, when we get down to the brass tacks of it, Diana, there might be only 3 people in this world who actually want you. There might be only 2 people who actually want me. But it's something. And I mean, of those 3 people, it's 3 people who want us, and then we want them. So the pools should be small. We can't have it all. We shouldn't have it all. Having it all has never been good for anyone. So what we have to do is figure out who wants us and who do we want and see where we can meet in the middle.
I want to bring culture into this because
Yes.
this is something I've noticed growing up, and I've noticed that different cultures appreciate plus size bodies in different ways. For me, growing up, even when I gained weight, I noticed that I always still had attention from Black men.
Of course.
And it could be, for whatever reason, but I noticed that black men seem to be more accepting of curvy bodies and bigger boobs and bigger butts, and like they were rapping about it in songs, way back in the day, before it was popular, before all the BBLs and before the Beyoncés and J-Lo's and the Nicki Minaj's and all the other people that are like the big booty blah 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 and Kim Kardashians that got them all famous. Black men have always kind of preferred that. I don't know. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's just because, there's a couple of reasons for this. There's some like really basic reasons, and then we can get into some higher minded reasons, because there are a few that do exist. The bare basic was availability. The thing is, when you're young and you're black and you ain't got shit to do, you're more likely to get laid by a bigger woman than you would be by a thinner one. That's how it starts. It just starts from basic availability.
Really?
Yeah. And
why do you think that?
Well, I think, we're talking about youth, right? So here's some things that plug into it. Except
I don't know if I agree with you.
Well, hold on. Let me follow you on.
Okay.
Well, because I'm explaining this from a man's perspective as to why he does it. And the thing is that you can sit in class and have daydreams about that girl in the front row that, doesn't really want to give you the time of day. You might be from the wrong side of the tracks, or she might be extra light skinned and high sedity or whatever. Give it a reason. But that's
another episode right there when we talk about light skin.
Yes, completely.
I'll bookmark that for now.
But the idea of thinking of out of the mind of a 15-year-old, which everything is a binary. It's this or that, this or that. Nuance does not exist in the mind of a child, but desire does. And so the thing is that we can get into the nuts and bolts of why it is that there were a larger plus size community in poorer areas, and this obviously transcends race. But since we're talking about black folks, the quality of food that we had available to us made us fat. So there's that. Now, as black men, we had, we were also conditioned to believe that the way out of the streets, out of the hood, was athletics. So you got a lot of people that were working out, playing ball, being active. So that's how you get a bunch of skinny men. And then, like, some of the women in the neighborhood weren't doing some of the same things. And so you had this dynamic, this push-pull dynamic of, I wanted to mess around with this person was available, and so that's what I went to. Then, because this bifurcates, if you talk about, like, poorer black men and why they gravitate for example to plus-sized white women, that's a completely different dynamic, and that's one that is more out of opportunism than anything else. That's more of like, I can't, no black woman in her right mind is going to put up with half of the shit that I want to get away with, but this one will. The white woman will. And so you get some men that have that. Ultimately, there is no one reason. It's availability, it's opportunism, it could be anything.
Or do you feel like plus-size women have lower self-esteem, so they're easier to get in bed? Like they'll just take whatever. Is that what you're saying? Or?
Well, that's an aspect. It's not the whole. I think that there's like a hierarchy of reasons, right? Availability, opportunism, low self-esteem. Because that's the way that it works for women. Now, what is the experience of the oversized or the plus-sized male coming up and going through this? Well, it's one of crushing, because here's the thing. Whereas a plus-size woman can sort of compromise herself in a way to boost her self-esteem, men don't get that same opportunity all the time, because we've been treated to believe that we're not even fuckable. And
I disagree with you. Well, no. I don't disagree with your experience or what you felt, but I would counter that I feel like it was so much more acceptable for men to be plus size.
Well, it was acceptable for us.
Taking their shirt off at the pool plus size than I would see women wanting to wear a swimsuit when they were plus, or just in general. Like,
right. Again, I think
men could be, a lot of times it's, when you're bigger, you have to be the funny person or the whatever to like fit in.
Yes. And that is also very true. You have to be the character. But again, I think that this also, if we could have an entire, because this is where colorism really takes shape.
And colorism is a topic I want to touch on another podcast as well. But we'll touch on it here.
But for the purposes of this, I can tell you one thing, Diana. the experiences of a light-skinned overweight person and a dark-skinned overweight person, they intersect in many areas, but in others they branch off. Because I think that there are reasons that I don't think are worth getting into within this context, but let's just accept that it is a thing. And if it is a thing, and if it is true, then the experiences tell different stories. And the fact is that if we're being honest, if you're darker and overweight and more imposing, you kind of throw your weight around, so to speak. And so it's almost a submission thing, because, you always called this and that when you're little, and then when you grow up, you have that chip on your shoulder. And that's how, it's when confidence turns inside itself, and it becomes malignant, because now it's just like, I'm going to impose my will and you're going to do what I say. And that's why you see a number of instances of domestic violence pop up amongst these specific groups. But again, different topic for a different time.
I was just thinking, I definitely want to explore the idea of colorism in an episode, because it just had my mind going on so many different topics. So I definitely will bookmark that. But I agree that the experiences are different. And you and I, as two light-skinned people, it would be, difficult for us to be able to try to speak about the experiences of plus-size people in general, when our experiences might differ greatly from other people. And I think part of what you and I had talked about before this podcast is that there were myths that we wanted to dispel. And one of them that you already brought up was about the fact that just because you're plus size doesn't mean you want to date plus size people, or that the only people available to you are plus size, right? You still have your preferences. You still have the people that like you. Right. I want to talk a little bit about a fetish. And I want to bring that up because I've seen shows on TV that talk about, or that depict stories of plus size people. And in this particular series, it was plus size women, and it was men that date plus size women. And it seemed so much kind of like a fetish, but there were some stories on there where there were men that would get upset when the woman would lose weight, because it felt like then they didn't have the same...
They weren't the person that they were. And it's the same dynamic as somebody who, I signed up for skinny person and you got fat. I don't want you anymore. We have preferences.
Or they like the control. Or they like the control of like feeling like I'm the best you can get. Well, and now you're going to lose weight, and now you're open to other people.
You raise a very interesting dichotomy, and it is this. There is a portion of this that is completely devoted to the idea I choose plus size women because I can control them, because they won't run out, because I have low self-esteem, and so therefore I don't want anybody to climb over top of me. There is that, right? But that's not a fetish. That's something much more malignant. Let's talk about the fact that there is a fetish for plus size people. And hey, it is not, and this might be something that other people might not say, it is not completely unhealthy. And in fact, let's ride with this for a second, and I'll tell you why. All of our fetishes are based on something that has to do with pleasure, something I enjoy. And there's a fetish for everything, right?
Foot fetish.
Some guys, most guys, foot fetish, big tits, big butt, light skin, dark skin. We have a specific thing that really amps up the desire, because if the desire is amped up, the pleasure will be maximized. So why do we own... So if I had a fetish for, thin women with enormous boobs, that's a thing. That's an actual thing. Why couldn't I have a fetish over, maybe I think that sexual pleasure is best achieved when you feel as much as possible of a person. Maybe I like my arms to sink in a little bit when I hold them, or or the way in which their thighs might wrap around my neck when performing oral sex. And that comes from a specific kind of woman, a bigger woman. What's wrong with that? And if anything, that means that there's a market for plus size, a specific type of plus size woman. As long as that, fetish is not destructive and it's not tied to harming someone, it's actually putting someone on a pedestal for something. And all of a sudden, you feel a level of desire that maybe you didn't feel you were even entitled to. How can that... obviously, there too much of anything is not good for you, in so much that If you receive too much praise for a specific thing, it might be destructive in other areas. Yes. I mean, if we talk about the extremes in anything, sure. But the common average day, hey, I'm a guy who's into bigger girls, and I know where to find them. And I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to spend some money on them. I'm going to do whatever.
I said I know where to find them.
I don't see what the...
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean... But that's the thing. It's like, but this will bear itself out if you allow it to. Let me tell you something, Diane. You know where I see the most amount of body acceptance? In kink spaces. In kink spaces. So if you're into any type of lifestyle, whether it is S&M, whether it is bondage, whether it's leather,
BDSM,
latex, whatever.
Shebang.
The whole schmear. People who are engaged, that is where I see plus-sized women have the most normalcy. Now, we can automatically tear down that argument and say it's because they're giving up ass or they like to have sex and it's a more sexual space. Okay, you know what? You can give it a reason, and many reasons exist. The self-esteem thing is something, but we've also been conditioned to believe that as larger people, we're not allowed to enjoy sex because there's something darker attached to it. No. Everybody fucks if they can. And if they can, doesn't matter what you look like, right? So...
Well, and that's dispelling another myth that plus-size people don't have great sex lives.
Right. And the thing is that I would argue that some plus-size people have better sex lives than the people people who always pick on them for being fat. Because I'm not paying attention to, my sex life became fantastic when I stopped paying attention to my fears. And when I started leaning into the people who were interested in me. And then because when somebody shows some real, genuine interest into you, not some imagined thing or not the thing that you wish for, that raises your level of confidence and that projects out of you. So if you are hot, funny, and interesting to one person and you lean into that, chances are you're going to be hot, funny, and interesting to someone else.
I'm curious. I want to ask you this as a man and as a plus-size man.
Yes.
If you have sex with a woman, do you notice all of the cellulite and the stretch marks and all of those things? Or do you look at it differently because you are plus size and you experience those things yourself?
Now, are you saying, do I notice it on myself or do I notice it on
your
my partner?
partner?
No, I mean, well,
how does that, do you feel like you're more accepting because you're plus size? Or do you feel like just from being a man perspective, you still...
Right, and I said this to you before. Once the door is open, you're walking inside. So, you stand in front of me naked, if that is what's about to happen, there's no more let me nitpick. And that's bullshit for television. That's stuff that people say on social media. Well, what if you feel... No. Anybody's like a plane that's coming in for landing. Once the approach is set, the plane's gonna land. Sex is gonna be had, and it's not gonna be a situation where I'm criticizing you. Like, I don't know anybody. I don't know. Please find me the sociopath who only has sex so that they can find the flaws. It doesn't exist. Because once we actually decide to do the thing is going to be done. And that's where the fear should absolutely go away. Because if we're together, then it's about having the pleasure. And some of the things that I don't know anybody who sits there and thinks about it from the perspective of, oh, what did I get myself into? No, once you've decided to do it and the arousal part happens and you're already starting to engage, then it's a done deal. And I don't think that there's any buyer's remorse that comes from, oh, was this person really as hot as they should have been? Or, oh, I didn't expect to see a stretch mark here. No, that's just where I'm going to lick now. So,
interesting.
That's just the idea. It's like, you're here with it. This is what you wanted. Go for it. Enjoy it. Make it enjoyable for them. Hopefully. I know that's also another show for another day. But this...
No, that segues perfectly into, the mechanics of sex for plus-size people.
Yes.
In your experience, have you found that there are certain positions or certain things that make sex more pleasurable for plus-size people? Or that you have to accommodate in a different way because of the size?
Well, I think there's always, certain accommodations that have to be made. for me, because I've lost a certain amount of weight, I've got a little extra skin. And some things need to be picked up and pushed out of the way. It's not, at the end of the day, it's just skin. There's nothing gross about it. It's the same skin. I tell somebody, when you look at your body and some parts of it might look like a bit of a melted candle, you reconcile it by the fact that, everything works exactly how it's supposed to work. Some things you got to push out of the way. But let me tell you, it gets out of the way. And body, I look at myself in the mirror these days often. And I will look at myself in the mirror naked often. And it's not even about a psych up. It's just, for me, I consider it like a measure of self-immersion, especially like before, during, or after sex. I will look in a mirror. I will see, how this is going and how this is moving. And, for me, it's about delivering pleasure. And I cannot deliver pleasure if I am mentally preoccupied with how I look. So
true.
It's about making it work. And honestly, I'll tell you, Diana, I've never had a partner. I've never had a sexual partner, and I've had my fair share, who has ever been like weirded out because I had to move the stomach over a little bit or whatever. Because the thing is that the thing that they showed up for is there, and it's fantastic. So you focus on the things that you want, and you de-emphasize the things that you don't.
So what tips or advice do you have for people who would like to be more confident in the bedroom as a plus size person?
Well, I think it's it's intent. If you want to be good in bed, you got to be good in bed whether you're thin or thick. And as a male, I think that one of the first things that any man, a plus size man, can do, because as plus size men, we have had to prove ourselves. It's like the idea of working harder times 2. I have to be as good in bed as a thin person times 2 so that I can make up for my faults. That was always the mental wiring that was associated with it, especially when you're younger, because the idea is if somebody lowered themselves enough, because obviously at the end of the day this is all about self-esteem, right? If somebody lowered themselves enough to let me fuck them, then I have to give them the show of their entire life. That's how it started. As the years progressed, it turned into, well, if you're good at something, you're just good at it. So as far as tips, things like workable things that any man can do is, first and foremost, hygiene. I know this.
Yes.
This is
clapping hands.
This is a basic, and really, should we have to mention this? Does this deserve mention?
Yes.
But it does.
We have to mention this.
When you are a plus size man, you have to know the landscape of your body, and you have to take care of it, because especially if you think that, there is always this idea that, a woman might not be as willing to go down on a plus size man for whatever reason. There's different stigmas attached to it, from the stigma of, oh, they're just going to be stinky down there. Well, that's something every man can control, and they can control it really easily, all the way to the myth that larger men, plus size men, have smaller penises, and therefore that makes them a lot more self-conscious. The reality is that there is no scientific evidence that suggests that a fat guy is going to have a smaller penis. What it is that when there's more real estate, everything looks smaller when it's smaller. So just to give the audience an example, a man can weigh 165 pounds and have an 8-inch penis. Now, according to all accounts, the average male penis globally is somewhere around 5 inches erect.
Really?
Yeah, that is I know.
That's the average?
The average is 5 to 6. It varies between 5 and 6 inches as an average.
Is this by country?
This is
no, I'm just kidding.
No, this is the actual aggregate, and that's the thing is that society has conditioned us to believe that all penises, the best penises are the big penises, and so if you don't have that you're not good enough. So imagine that if you are 360 pounds, but you still have that same 8-inch penis.
Yeah.
The penis doesn't look as big on that person as it does on the thinner person, because it's all sight and proportion. The penis is the same. So the tip to men is that if you've got it, use it. And just know that, to give you an example, I was friends with a woman for many, many years. I had a crush on her, but then we became friends eventually. And then fast forward about 15 years, and something happened where, we ended up having sex. And the thing is, it went fine. It was exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was a good time. I enjoyed myself thoroughly, and she did too. And we were driving the next day, and she made an offhand comment that I don't think she meant to be an insult, but I kind of, for just a very brief, because it was what I consider to be the greatest backhand compliment somebody could give you. And when you're plus sized, everything feels like a backhanded compliment. Like, oh, this was good, but... So for her, she said this as an off, and I think that she was trying to be complimentary, but she said, talking about sex the night before, she said, I didn't realize that you were as big as you were. But she said specifically, I didn't believe that, I had no idea that your penis was as big as it was. So on one end, every man likes the ego stroke, but at the same time, it was what you just said is that your entire perception of me before we had sex was that I was likely going to have a small penis. So you prejudged me in a way that you didn't think was wrong, but this is what society has told us. We are told that we don't have everything that we need to have, or a fat man couldn't satisfy a woman in bed, and that's not true. I mean, just like there are just as many. We can get a lineup of 7 or 8 165-pound men with penises from 8 to 10 inches, just a variety. Not all of them are going to be great in bed, and in fact, some of them might not be great in bed. Why? Because if you're told that you already are going to, you have this, so therefore you don't need to do better, or you don't need, because it just because you have the thing, whatever that thing is, that's all you need to do. Well, you may not know how to do it right, or some men.
Well, I will say, just having it does not make you good.
Right.
I don't care how big it is.
Right, and that's the thing is that
that is not.
And contrary to popular opinion, we do need to know how to use it, especially if the average male
The
is
whole motion in the ocean,
and that becomes a very literal thing, because
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with many women. We talk about sex, and we talk about therapeutic methods by which to approach sexuality. And one of the things that I've heard, that this was a great surprise to me, is that there are a number of women who don't like extremely large penises because they end up getting hurt, because the person who's using them doesn't know what he's doing, and therefore he's making it an uncomfortable experience and not a pleasurable one. And
I actually had a guy who asked me a question. He asked me, how do I feel about men who are very well endowed? And I said, why? And he's just said, well, I've learned that not every woman wants a big penis. And I was like, okay. And at the time I kind of thought it was like a guy that I met on a dating app. And
Right.
I was like, ooh, look at you, just trying to come off and be like, ooh, I'm so big. Like women, it hurts them or something. And I was just like, whatever. I'm like, I'm sure it's fine, this and that. And then he sent me pictures, and I was like, wow, this. And for a second you're looking at it and you're like, it sounds so good, and we're so accustomed to being like, oh yeah, it's got to be like 10 inches and whatever. And then you actually see what that looks like, right? And you're just like, you know what? I don't know that that's actually a requirement. I think we've hyped up so much the size and how big it has to be. Granted, it's not that we want it small or anything,
Right.
but on the same hand, it's like, it is a thing to literally be freaked out and look at it and be like, whoa, I don't know if that would even be pleasurable for me.
Right, and that's the thing. But to that point, if you asked him, how well do you know how to use it? And he would come up with, if he's, by him doing that, he put himself out on a limb, right? Because the idea of having a discussion about a man's penis is not necessarily a welcome one when you're first dating. But, and this, I think a lot of women will remember what I'm talking about here. There was that infamous episode of Sex and the City where, the character that Kim Cattrall played, she, Samantha, overly promiscuous, and then, always talking about how she wanted, somebody with a big dick, and then one night she brought a guy home who had what was essentially too much dick. and her reaction to it, and the fact that, you know, she's like, he couldn't even fit this thing in. And you know, while thank God I've never had like an embarrassing situation like that, I've had situations where, yeah, we got to have a conversation, not because of, you know, I've got a 10-inch or 13-inch something I have to throw over my shoulder, but there's also issues of girth, and you need to talk about how that whole dynamic works. But it's about communication, and as somebody who is plus sized, it's harder for people to have that conversation up front, and have that conversation in a way that doesn't either feel like, oh, he's grandstanding, or he's just completely afraid of having sex, so that leads me to believe it might not be any good. So it's a tightrope sometimes.
Yeah, and so speaking of that, what have you found to be the best positions for plus size people?
Okay, so for plus
to engage in sex.
So I think that as a man, it is dependent. Like, you need to know what you have, and you need to know what. So let's just go from smaller to larger. So if you're a larger person with maybe a more modest or normal sized penis, the best position is always going to be missionary. And I know that there's this idea, this fear that certain people do things a certain way, and therefore they can't, they don't want to crush somebody. You're like, oh, don't lay on me, don't crush on me. No, it's largely about how you remain in a position, and also talk about it. Like, find out how flexible your partner is. If your partner is flexible, then you can, you know, what's comfortable to you. Have that conversation. I think so many people sort of dive in on a thing, and all of a sudden it becomes, well, I can't do this, so it's going to freak me out. So for plus size men, I think it's always going to be missionary first, cowgirl second, and take it from there. I mean, those are the two primary positions. Now, depending on the man and depending on his partner, because if it's a thinner partner, then if you're a bigger guy, if your partner is thin, then they can just, doggy style is the third position from behind. And that can be. The one thing, though, is follow the cues of your partner. Let your partner determine and decide what it is that works for you both. That way there is no... Because, as you know, as a woman, I'm sure you have as many stories about how awkward that first time with someone can be.
Oh, yeah.
So much of that comes from... Now, yes, if you, met somebody at the club and you hooked up with them, so what? But... if this is somebody that you've been dating and you're over time and it's leading up to that magic moment, you got to have conversations and not make it into how do you want to do it? What do you let's have a conversation about expectations. What are you expecting?
Yeah.
What do you want? What makes you feel good? I remember dating, and also as men, and this is I hope for your male listeners, this is of most importance. As men, we have to actively, how should I put this? Decenter ourselves from a sexual situation. Center your partner. If you are approaching a situation purely about your pleasure and your pleasure alone, it is going to be an unfulfilling experience for you both. So, decentering yourself means focusing on the actual pleasure of your partner. And you do that by paying attention to what makes her feel good. I had a conversation with a former partner who said, "Look, this is our first time together. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like one of the reasons why I don't really like that is because I'm always being asked to do something, and they're not." Well, the problem that presented itself is she could not approach the situation as free as she wanted to, because she always felt like, oh, I'm going to get everything I want up into a certain stopping point. And once we hit that stopping point, that's where your pleasure begins and mine never actually takes place. That is a problem that is easily remedied by just having a conversation and realizing that the path to your pleasure as an individual will have to be met halfway with someone else's. And maybe it's not always going to be 50-50. Sometimes it'll be 70-30, sometimes it'll be 60-40, but make sure that if there is an imbalance, and this is speaking to men directly, if there is an imbalance, then that imbalance has to sit with us.
I like how you're emphasizing so much, communication being key in intimate relationships, just in general. Excuse me. But just in general, like it would be in a relationship where there's not a plus size person. And being open about your preferences and about your boundaries are definitely key, because a lot of times it's those boundaries or the lack of communication that leads to people not feeling confident and not feeling attractive, and that detracts from the pleasure that they would be getting from that sexual experience, regardless of what their size is. I think even people who are not plus size can be, not have a lot of, can have low self-esteem or lack self-confidence in their bodies, regardless of their size. It could be any other characteristic about themselves that they feel uncomfortable with or insecure about. So I think definitely the communication aspect is key. Are there any other kind of thoughts, comments, or takeaways that you have with regards to plus size people dating or romance or
Well, I think
intimacy?
ultimately love yourself. And I know that really comes off as kind of cliche like in some aspects, but I think that one of the things that really gets in the way of a good time is how you approach it. And I think especially when you're plus size and you have this attitude that, well, maybe this person's not going to find me attractive, or I'm battling all the different anxieties. You never show up as a person. If you want to enjoy something, you've got to show up for it mentally as well as physically, right? So honestly, it's just about being yourself and accepting yourself as a plus size person, and then choosing to have fun. And then more importantly, take care of yourself. Self-care leads into being able to care for others. For some it may be therapy. I think a lot of people who are dealing, especially with body transformation and body acceptance, you mentioned going to therapy. Therapy is a large part of the experience of really gaining the peace that allows you to have self-acceptance. And when you have that level of self-acceptance, you will absolutely be the person that you want other people to be attracted to.
And I love, I know we had a conversation about this before, and you had some things that you said that I really kind of took to heart. One thing you said was about normalizing proactive conversations about preferences and expectations.
Correct.
Which I think is very important. We need to normalize these kind of conversations because, bodies come in all shapes and sizes. And, instead of trying to find reasons to exclude people, focus on or think about, the things that make that person unique, appreciate unique qualities in other people, value people who are in your company, and have conversations about what you feel insecure about. I think sometimes we try to hide our insecurities because we don't want to shed light on them or highlight them. But sometimes it's important to be able to trust your partner enough to talk through those kinds of conversations. And I think once you get things out in the open, it makes you a lot less inhibited about, with what you're willing to do.
100%. 100%. And what you will find is when you communicate and you dispel some of those anxieties, the relationship that you have, the quality of that relationship, because you're not going to have one foot out the door. You're not going to be that person who is always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I mean, come up with a cliche. The long and the short of it is you're not going to have those negative feelings that are going to bleed off and essentially kill whatever could have grown. And if you're not at the point where you're actually dating the person, it's going to cause you to want to give up a lot sooner. So in terms of advice, the lasting, parting shot of advice is, if you want something, want it enough that you show that person enough that they would want you. And that's where the desire comes from. Create desire by wanting something. Want something enough that other people say it and say, this person wants something. This isn't a person that's like, oh, poor me, woe is me, I can't believe that I'm not getting this, so on and so forth. It's really about in this moment, I want something enough to make it happen. So with that, I would leave it and say, get out there and actually don't be afraid to date. Don't be afraid to do those things. Don't be afraid to take control of your own love life.
I agree. And don't let societal judgments affect your enjoyment of anything because of being plus size, whether it's a trip, whether it's your sexual experiences, whether it's your ability to get out there and just enjoy yourself or just to date in general. Worry about yourself and your own happiness.
Yes.
That's one thing you said. What changed for me? I stopped thinking about what everybody else was going to be worried about and started thinking about what's going to make me happy and what things do I need to do or try so that I can get myself out there. And my self-confidence has grown as a result of that. And knowing that I am the type of a lot of men.
Yes.
And I've learned that, that, and even if it wasn't a lot of men, I'm someone's type.
Right. And as long as we realize,
finding people,
as long as not to interrupt, but as long as we realize that yes, you are somebody's type. And also, your success should not be compared against someone else's. So the idea of, well, this person, and this is something that's almost always assigned to plus size people. Well, if that person can date something, why can't I, or date someone? Why can't I? This conditional, why is this person happy and I'm not?
Could be in a marriage. Yeah.
And that comes to the idea of paying attention to one's self. You're doing this for you. You're not doing this so that somebody else can see you date somebody. Your happiness is largely associated and attached to you as a person, as an individual, and you should want that for yourself. And the only way to want it is to be proactive, be confident, and be the person that somebody else would want. That's it.
I love that. Well, we'll end it there. I know we could have probably talked for a whole other hour,
of course,
especially the two of us.
Of course.
But thank you so much for joining us today. And if people want to find you, want to comment or reach out, how can they get a hold of you?
They can look us up on the web at neverdaunted.net. That's where everything's at. And we're actually in a process of rebuilding. We're going to be putting up some new shows, having up some new experiences. You're going to be part of that. We want to do some roundtable discussions and really keep the conversations going so that people from all walks of life, whether you're this or that, there's going to be something for everyone.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to flash your Instagram info and all of that on the bottom as well.
Always appreciate it.
So I think it's, I'll shout it out. Shimbo, SHIMBO 1977. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct.
Yay, there we go. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you got something out of this conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts and comments, so please feel free to leave those comments. And if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe at all the places where you listen to podcasts or on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all of the socials. So thanks again, Hashim, for being our special guest today. And until next time, folks, goodbye.